Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host Faizal with the prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy, and blessed. And may Allah bless, fill this world with peace and justice, inshallah. Ameen. The topic we are about to discuss today is related to Imam Khomeini Rahmatullah Alayh, who is the true spiritual revolutionary leader of not only Iranian nation but all the people who love justice, faith, and dignity, who wants to live in an independent life with originality and true values of humanity and Islam as well. A revolutionary leader, a leader who changed the course of history, a leader who talk about God, and he was the one who shared those values which are related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the wahdaniyat or monotheism, which he has expressed through his life, throughout his life. Once people were chanting, "We are the servant of Khomeini," and he said, "No, we all are the servant of God. We are the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." He also emphasized on the true values of Islam. Islam was stranger according to him, and we were supposed to understand Islam. It was stranger not only for the Western world but also within the Islamic world. So he was the one who brought this Islam to us, and he who shared the real value of not only Islam, but he took the power from Karbala and Ashura, and he did Qiyam, and he did stand against the tyrants of this world through his true spiritual Islamic principles, and who emphasized not only on the knowledge, and he said only knowledge can take you the knowledge only can take you to the hellfire if you just take the knowledge of even fiqh, morality, ethics, or even the oneness of the God or anything like that, if you don't purify yourself. Obviously, purification is the key and the essence of everything as well. So it is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is connected to reflecting Allah's name within our personalities of truth and justice and love and kindness and humanity and generosity. So this is the true spirit of Islam, which he has reflected and defeated the tyrants of this world and the whole West, who could not even understand what he has done to this world and how he has changed this history as well. So we will talk about his personality and how West look at him, and how our own people, the Muslim world, look at him, and what kind of services his personality has shared with us, what he has contributed to towards this world. So we do have very prestigious guest with us, Sayyid Mohsen Abbas, who is a journalist and a broadcaster and a researcher as well. And we do have Marcus Papadopoulos, who is a historian and an author, analyst, and writer. And we do have Sister Batul Subedi, who is a political commentator, researcher, and the writer as well. I am really honored to have you all on the show. Thank you so much for your time. And I will first of all move on to Mohsen Bhai, towards you, and would like to ask you, when we talk about Imam Khomeini, first thing, whatever it is, what do you think is that thing which comes into your mind, and what do you think? How was the world before Khomeini and after Khomeini? How he changed this world? What he contributed in that way?
Well, polymathic comes to mind straight away in terms of Ayatollah Khomeini's personality and his reality. He is effectively, as most Ayatollahs, people who are learned in the Islamic faith, virtually get a PhD every 3 years, and literally they spend their lives in kind of an academic, a theological, and a kind of an intellectual pursuit. And many of them then are not confined to being simply jurisprudence, which is one of the main things we know them to be, faqiehs. They also become sociologists in a way. They become politicians in a sense. They can become They can become anthropologists. I mean, all these terms that we have, in fact, these scholars end up really having a kind of a very broad polymathic knowledge base from which they draw. And Ayatollah Khomeini was a very unique individual in the sense that he also combined the role of Arif, I believe, and that's a very, if you like, metaphysical and mystical role, something which alludes to the spirituality in a very deep esoteric sense. That's not something that people know him for very much, but also as a poet par excellence, actually, a poet in the mold of Rumi and a lot of the, if you like, the Sufi mystical poets that you'll think up. You'll find that Ayatollah Khomeini wrote some wonderful works around that. He's also very much somebody who focused on ethics and manners and virtues of human beings. So his 40 hadith, for instance, very much focus around analyzing the human individual and their ethical qualities. So that's the intellectual Khomeini, if you like. The political one, of course, exploded onto the scene in 1979 in a way which is still affecting the world. The globe is still impacted by that, very much so, even now. That was in the shape of the revolution, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and its, if you like, tremors have gone to the halls of Washington, the city of London here, Whitehall itself, and as far east as no doubt China and all the rising powers of the East. In fact, one of his first acts when he came into power was to send letters to the likes of Mikhail Gorbachev and inviting them to this new way. And what was the new way? It was really an idea which hadn't really been expressed, and in fact he himself kept it very much under wraps. And it was the notion of Velayat-e-Faqih, or the leadership of the jurisprudence, of the spiritual thinkers, of which he obviously was one. And I think it was a concept which hadn't been seen before, but it emerged very soon after he was brought to Iran, that was the system he had in mind. There are lots of theories and people can go into a lot of conjecture, but the reality was that the West saw him as just a mullah, because no religious leader, certainly in recent history, had ever caused any political turmoil. In fact, they paid allegiance to most of the Anglo-Zionist empire and were very compliant with any autocratic power, be it Muslim or otherwise. In most of the Muslim countries, you'll see that even with the Ottoman Turks' history, you'll see that within the Mughals. The jurisprudence and the religious leaders played second fiddle and didn't try to impose any kind of religious order. Well, Imam Khomeini really brought forward religious democracy as an option for the first time, I would say. And Iran now operates the Velayat-e-Faqih system, which is a combination of a kind of an overview of spiritual, religious, if you like, and virtues and ethics, divinely rooted virtue ethics, divinely rooted in the Holy Quran, but at the same time also embraces a lot of the other, if you like, probably secular modes of operation within the field of politics and the social sphere and beyond. So there are these two elements that come to my mind straight away. There are many others, but I think his impact on the Muslim world has been absolutely cataclysmic, because as soon as he established this religious democracy, the West and the Americans triggered an entire movement called Wahhabism and Takfirism in order to destroy the image of Islam, to destroy the image that was to rival the Islam which was now the political Islam, which was emerging, the morally political Islam, which Ayatollah Khomeini was advocating, and for the desperate attempts to keep the despotic Muslim dynasties in power within that Central Asian area, particularly, or rather West Asian area, particularly. They did everything. They spent, and they've now spent probably to the tune of trillions of dollars in order to reverse what Imam Khomeini managed to achieve. So this can't be underestimated, that virtually every one of the American or the Anglo-Zionist empire's policies in West Asia has been a reaction to the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And of course, even Russia, which went down, Soviet Union, which went down during the course of this whole period between Ayatollah Khomeini's arrival on the scene politically in a global way, and now is that you've got the Russians also reneging on all things Western and imperialist, and you've got, of course, China rising massively as well, which also has, in many ways, an antagonistic or an opposite policy to the West. So we're seeing cataclysmic changes globally with a kind of the rise of a multipolar world, which Iran, China, and Russia are all very much invested in. But at the heart of it now, what you find is that actually there is a clear-cut ideology, there is a clear-cut direction which Iran manifests, and which is now filtered into the likes of the axis of resistance. And that, so Imam Khomeini's legacy, if you like, in some ways, is reflected in Hezbollah, who today are massively bombing Israel and uprooting Israel from its very, its secure base, which was very taken for granted not so long ago. They're embedded within the Islamic Jihad and within Hezbollah, and of course within the Hamas and the Palestinian resistance as a whole. You can see it manifested in the Yemenis, Ansarullah's, sealing off of the Bab al-Mandeb and their attacks on even USS Eisenhower, not only just last week, with ballistic missiles, very much working in harmony with the Islamic Republic of Iran and perhaps even supplied by them. One can't fully say. But there is also Iraq, which was saved from ISIS, again, on the back of this same ideology, which Ayatollah Sistani, the other major giant within the world of Shiism, certainly within Iraq and Iran particularly. And again, you can put that down to the Islamic Revolution and the ideas of Imam Khomeini, where these have erupted. But you'll notice one thing, and this is very important, because the message which Imam Khomeini and Islam actually has is universal, and it actually takes into account humanitarian and human civilizational values. They're not values which are exclusive to Islam necessarily. They reach out to the rest of the world, and they are fundamentally based on a drive towards justice, and especially in fighting for the oppressed. And you see that manifested in the entire legacy policies, legacy projects of Imam Khomeini, manifested through Imam Khamenei now, and where they reach out to all oppressed people, certainly in West Asia, where they have a reach, and they support the poor, the destitute, the oppressed. And you'd have to recognize also that revolution changes. Its principles may be the same, but when you see it applied, for instance, by Hezbollah in Lebanon, you saw the emergence of a social welfare movement, a political social welfare drive and movement in Lebanon, which first of all kicked out the Israelis and then tried to unify Lebanese people who had been in civil war for decades prior to that. You see it manifested in Nigeria through the movement of Sheikh Zakzaki, Ibrahim Zakzaki, a black spiritual leader in Nigeria, standing against the tyranny of the Nigerian regime peacefully, but not creating revolution in the same way that Imam Khomeini did, but actually taking the message forward. So you see, there are two manifestations. See it with the Yemeni Ansarullah, who stood up against Saudi Arabia and the Western Anglo-Zionist tyranny, using Saudi as its proxy in Yemen for years, draining Yemen. But there you saw the Yemen Ansarullah, who are essentially not Shia either. They're not necessarily naturally religiously, ideologically linked to Iran, but they manifested their own revolution, their own way of doing things. Syria, again, very much not a Shia outfit, a very secular society, has also adopted that resistance politics. And so you see, I could carry on in Iraq with the Hashd and beyond. But all of this is part of a Khomeini-type rejection of the great Satan, of imperialism, of the Anglo-Zionist variety. And it's saying we want sovereignty, we want independence, and we want the rights of ordinary human beings to be given genuine freedom, genuine liberty, genuine sovereignty, all of which the Anglo-Zionist empire promises but never actually delivers.
Thank you, Mohsin Bhai. Dr. Marcus, how do you see Imam Khomeini Rahmatullah alayhi's personality? Do you think like West see them in a very negative picture? Even the Rebbe Muslim, they don't see him as a positive figure for them, obviously. So how do you see, when you, as a historian, as a person who writes and think and look at the thing in an analytical way? So what do you think as a leader, the revolution he brought in, the kind of changes that ideology he has brought to us, what difference did it created like for this world and for the Western tyrant rulers, for instance? And how do you see his personality? What messages do you think his personality give to this world, or good or bad, in whatever way you think he has contributed to this world? Because when we talk about the leadership, Western argument generally is that it's a dictatorship, and because they have supreme leader and he is religious and he believes in religion and all that, whereas Imam Khomeini itself says like a supreme leader is not a dictator. Islam rejects dictatorship, and Islam is against dictatorship, and it does whatever it has to in order to like abstain from it, for instance. So why is that confusion in the West, and how do you compare like his personality to the other leaders of this world, if you want to, or whatever your thoughts are on that?
Well, Imam Khomeini remains an individual of immense intrigue, of great fascination, a pivotal figure who not only changed the history of Iran, but also the history of the Middle East. His achievements and legacies are numerous, but for me, his greatest achievement, his greatest legacy is as follows. He returned Iran to the Iranian people. Prior to the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Iran was a vassal state of the West's, principally of America and Britain. It was nothing more than a colony. Its natural resources were exploited by the West. Its industry was exploited by the West. The cultural and spiritual values of the Iranian people were trampled on by the West. And then in 1979, Khomeini changes all of that through a revolution which, as I said, returned Iran to the Iranian people. The Iranian people are the heirs to the Persian empires, to Cyrus the Great, Darius the Great, Xerxes the Great. But prior to 1979, that great, magnificent history was simply discarded by the West and its puppets ruling Iran. But following 1979, the dignity, the self-respect of the Iranian people was restored and has been and remains intact to this day. And that is because of Khomeini, a man who was fascinating, not just as a politician, but as a human being. And for me personally, I find Khomeini the man even more intriguing than Khomeini the politician. Khomeini understood the true nature of the West, or as I say, the Western ruling elites. He saw beyond the facade that the West is committed to democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. He understood that the West cares nothing for democracy, cares nothing for freedom, cares nothing for the rule of law. He understood that the West is a evil, depraved juggernaut which seeks to subdue independent thinking and cultured people all across the world, in all four corners of the world. And Khomeini put a stop to that in relation to Iran. And as a result of that, a resistance movement in West Asia was born. And so that is why I believe Khomeini's greatest legacy is that he returned Iran to the Iranian people. There is another point I would like to make. Khomeini has relevance today to the indigenous populations of the Western world. And let me explain why. Whereas Khomeini was devoted to Iran, to the Iranian people, to Iranian history, and to the cultural and spiritual values of the Iranian people, those who rule the Western world, not govern, rule the Western world, have only contempt for the indigenous populations. Let's take Britain, for example, the British ruling elite. And I'm talking about the very core of the British ruling elite, not the politicians who are merely puppets, useful idiots. I'm talking about the dark, sinister forces at the heart of the British ruling elite. They hate the British people. They hate British history. They hate the culture of the British people. They hate the religion of the British people, namely Christianity. They have virtually decimated the national identity of the British people by a number of methods, but one of which is to have brought immigrants from outside of the Western world into the Western world to destroy the Western world from within. Now, Khomeini never, ever would have allowed and did not allow anyone to raise not even a finger against the national identity of the Iranian people, against the cultural and spiritual values of the Iranian people. And that is why I say that people in the Western world, the indigenous populations in the Western world, who are being targeted by the Western ruling elites, combined with Zionists, because this is a joint project between the Western ruling elites and Zionists. The ordinary people in America, Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, and so on, should learn about what it is to be a truly, truly patriotic person, a truly patriotic politician, someone who would die for their country and for their people. And Khomeini encapsulates that entirely. And I believe that whether people want to agree entirely with Khomeini's policies, or disagree, or agree and disagree to an extent, no one can doubt his devotion to Iran and to the Iranian people. We don't have that in Britain. We don't have that in America. We don't have that in Canada and Australia and New Zealand and France and Germany and Italy and so on and so on. We have people ruling us in the Western world who hate our national identity, who hate our culture, who hate our religion, Christianity. And they have virtually destroyed Christianity in Britain. And they are going a long way to doing that in America and in Canada as well. And Khomeini never would have allowed anyone to touch Islam in Iran or to touch any aspect of the identity of the Iranian people. So again, people in the Western world, the indigenous populations, should learn about Khomeini. Because if in Britain or in America or Canada, if we had someone like him, our equivalent of Khomeini, then Britain, for example, would not be what it is today, namely godless, soulless, amoral, decadent, and depraved. So again, his greatest legacy was that he returned Iran to the Iranian people. And I sincerely hope and I urge people in the Western world, as I do when I talk with people on a professional level and at a private and in private, to learn about the pivotal figure that was Imam Khomeini, a true patriot and a true Muslim, someone who gave everything he had to his country, to his land, to his people, to his history and his heritage. And again, I only wish we had such a revered man in control of Britain and the rest of the Western world.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marcus. Sister Batul, what are your thoughts? What our prestigious guests have already said, if you want to add anything to all that. And what do you think, how he could inspire the youth of Iran, right? Because when he was asked, who is your army, where is your army? And he said, like, my army is in the laps of the mothers and the wombs of the mothers. So what do you think, how he has inspired the youth of Iran to fight for truth and justice and, for example, Islam? Or what do you think, how he could do that? And he still inspires a lot, especially, I mean, if I personally think about him and whenever I try to learn about him, it's really something, every time I read about him or learn about him, is something, there's always which inspires a lot, and you feel like connecting to him more deeply at more deeper level, and it connects us to Ahlul Bayt and Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So how do you think, what is the inspiring factor and what legacy he has left for us today and at that time as well?
Right, so youth are, of course, energetic and active. I think that's why there's a lot of focus on youth. Typically speaking, it's because they are the seeds of change in society, and youth are subconsciously actively looking for role models that can give them the inspiration to act as change makers. You know, most people go through the trends and the direction of society at the time, and I think Dr. Marcus put it very well in terms of, if you look at the society, the decadent society that exists in the West, it's because there is a real vacuum when it comes to real role models that represent real values. That's why the majority of the youth get absorbed into celebrity culture, gaming, pornography, mass sexualization, gang culture, etc. That's what happens when you create a vacuum. The youth go with the wind, they follow the popular trends, and that really weakens society as a whole if the energies are not channeled in the right direction. And as Dr. Marcus put it very rightly so as well, the capitalist society want the masses to be turned into kind of clogs and dumb machines. And ultimately, as Sayyid Mohsen Abbas mentioned, that is why they fight the Islamic Republic of Iran, because the ideals of the revolution sought to essentially awaken the masses. Today, for example, we see that the West is in charge of really having an effect through the soft war over capturing hearts and minds. We discussed celebrity culture, for example. It's Hollywood today that reigns. But look at what happens in the wake of the removal of those masks of deception. After Western values have been exposed, especially and particularly in the wake of the war in Gaza, look at the way the youth today have galvanized, in universities, not minding mass arrests. Despite their faith and background, they might not come from a specific faith or background, but it's really an awakening of their inner state, and it's the human values coming to life that we're seeing that's manifesting. And so you find that in most cultural revolutionary movements, whether it was, communism in China or elsewhere, it relied on the youth. The youth are typically the subject of the speeches of, parties and political entities due to the inherent energies of the youth. The Islamic Revolution of 1979, it represented ultimately the interests and the needs of the people, as Dr. Marcus put very well, it was a people's revolution. It rejected the imposed tyranny and oppression of America, who Imam Khomeini called the Great Satan. America, of course, in this position wished to subjugate and to enslave the masses. The resources of Iran did not belong to the people of Iran. And so ultimately, this hegemony reigned at the expense of the people of the country. So aspects of dignity, izzah, freedom of the masses, that was the slogan of the revolution. That was not just theoretical, but it was a reality on the ground. And what was captivating about Imam Khomeini was that he was at the forefront of those who represented this line. As the leader of the revolution, he went through a history of struggle. He was exiled from Iran to Iraq for 15 years, to France then. He had a very strong stance. He didn't fall in the face of the pressure in which the whole world combined to essentially besiege Iran. You had an 8-year war, that sacred defense in which the West armed Saddam Hussein with all kinds of weapons, ultimately to uproot the revolution. But he didn't fall in the face of that. So his strong energy, following up with the issues of the common masses and the issues of the Ummah, made him really stand out as a leader. He went from France to Iran when the Shah was still present. So ultimately, he was one with the people of Iran and their struggle. He cared for the masses and the Ummah at his own expense, because ultimately his life was in danger. Instead of being exiled to Iran, the Shah wanted to ultimately execute Imam Khomeini, but he realized that if he executed him, that would generate mass unrest. So he said, the solution would be to exile him. So the first thing that we see that Imam Khomeini did when he came back to Iran in 1979, after his 15-year-long exile, was he gave a speech in Behesht Zahra, to lift the spirits of the masses. So he was not someone that was, ruling or sitting behind closed doors, and that's ultimately why, to answer your question, he created a large strata from the youth who said, this is my leader, this is my leader, because he would say things like, I am the dust under the feet of those who are fighting, at the war front, and defending the ideals of this revolution. I am a servant of the people. And the people saw that for themselves, because they saw that he was a man that didn't even allow his children to resume positions of power or political authority. He was a man that when he left this world, he had the most humble home. He had nothing in his possessions to even give to his children to inherit. These were the qualities of this man in his personal life that really resonated with the masses and captivated the hearts and minds. And this created a kind of great leadership from those youth. So we're discussing the youth of 1979 who went on to hold positions of power. So when you look at someone like Qasim Soleimani, for example, he graduated from the school of the Islamic Revolution and from the leadership of Imam Khomeini. And these and this legacy is still present, which is why the ideas and the values that he represented are constantly put forward, despite his absence, and that continues to inspire. And one last point over here, just to stress on Imam Khomeini's leadership, was that, as Dr. Marcus was saying, it's a people's revolution, and he expected the people to create that change, not him as an individual. So he led in such a way that the people came to the realization that, it's their presence on the streets that will bring about the change. The revolution was led whilst he was in exile for those 15 years, the culmination to the point where then he returned back to Iran. So even today, when we look at the Islamic Republic, the strength of the Islamic Republic comes from the people approving the system. Because if we think about it logically, 4 decades of mass soft war strategies and campaigns and attempts by the West to cause regime change and coup attempts. You can argue that the coup attempt in 1953 that was successful when Mohammad Mossadegh was deposed from power might have been because there wasn't a strong attraction between, or a strong inherent connection between the Iranian people and the ideals that Mohammad Mossadegh represented, to the extent to which it was strong in the case of Imam Khomeini, and I would argue still exists until today, because we're talking about a nation that managed to depose the Shah, who was a big tyrant. If one looks in the books of history and sees the mass crimes that the Shah committed to subdue the revolution, that didn't stop the people. The fear of the people didn't stop them from going out on the streets. So today, if the people of Iran are not coming out calling for the deposition of the system, are not caving in fact, the people of Iran are being punished. The people of Iran are being punished by the West for sticking to the ideals of the revolution. This tells you that the people want the revolution. The people support the ideals of the revolution. It's not to say that everyone 100% in Iran agrees with every aspect of its system of governance. No, but in terms of what the ideals of the revolution represent, the people want to get closer to those ideals and not further away from it. So it's through this system today that exists within the Islamic Republic that progress and changes are made if elements prove unworkable in any field. You know, it's a system that has the capacity to renew itself, to absorb those problems that may surface, and the movement and the moment ultimately the nation's people decide to collectively abandon the Islamic Republic and its leadership, that's when we'll see the system fail and not stand strongly as it does today. And it's enough for people to, for example, look at the funerals of the likes of, President Raisi, the millions and millions of Iranians who came out, or Haj Qasim Soleimani, or even Imam Khomeini's funeral. It was estimated there were over 20 million Iranians on the streets of Iran. That's no easy feat. And I'll challenge anyone to give me any other leadership that's had this level of attachment with its people.
That's really true, and I would agree with that as well, because so many, like, I feel whenever I look at Iran and the people who are ready to die, and mothers who are there to share their, even if they have only one son or the 6 or the 8 or the 10, they would love to sacrifice them in the way of Islam. And it's really huge power, I mean, in the face of truth and justice and humanity, or the real core value of justice, because Imam Khomeini also advocated the you can say the system of Imam Ali alayhi salam, in the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and it was based on adl means justice, and doing something righteous. And he when he gave the concept of supreme leader, even he said that supreme leader is not the one who would commit the sin, and we wouldn't be like appreciating such people who would be ruling the government or something like that. So there are real clear values and principles he had laid down, and it was really inspiring. I mean, even in this confusing time and in this confusing world where information is really mixed up, and it's really hard to filter something to get the truth out of it. It's really difficult. So Mohsen bhai, what are your thoughts, how he inspired what I mean, when I was watching a documentary, and in which I think so it was some kind of CIA official, and he say West couldn't understand how a person who eats yogurt and onion and have a very humble life, or more simple life, is dictating a revolution. So and they don't even understand now whatever is going on in terms of excess of resistance as well. So how do you think what was the thing inside him which has created that much power within himself? Because if you don't have power within yourself, you can't achieve anything, because it's the real battle. We as a person, as a human being, we do understand, if we are not self-aware and we are not self-connected, we can't fight outside battles. So he has brought the revolution. So how do you see these beautiful human values he has reflected through his personality? Because when we look at his family values, even, they are so beautiful. He wouldn't keep his tap on just because he would put some kind of a sponge on underneath, or cloth underneath the water tap, so that his wife wouldn't wake up because of the voice of water and something like that. So these are the very little details when we read about it and we learn about it, so we do understand how beautiful Islam is. But the way it is reflected outside, in the outside world, is really different story. And what are your conclusive thoughts? What messages do we get from his life, and how we can take it forward?
I think it's very important that we're focusing on the character of Imam Khomeini now, because I think you see, the human civilization or any society has a fundamental unit that it has to really agree on and really aspire to. the most fundamental unit of human society is one human individual. And of course, within Islam, we have the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and we have, of course, Jesus Christ, Prophet Abraham, Prophet Moses. We have an Abrahamic connection in terms of the character of that fundamental unit of society. And those units of society, I would argue, the prophetic ones, basically were all virtuous. They had the same values. There's no difference between the value of Hazrat Ibrahim, Hazrat Isa or the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, consistent. And so therefore there is a commonality and a universality which is expressed through those individuals, which we must focus on, because if we're looking for a world which is harmonious and peaceful and wants to come to sort of a kind of an understanding of how we interact and how we build this world into a better place, and to also become optimal human beings. Optimal human being will lead to an optimal, perhaps, family unit, and then perhaps an optimal community, and then an optimal nation, or an optimal set of international bodies and societies, and therefore a planet. It's very important that we focus on this, and I think that anybody who's espousing a vision, first of all, has to have a clarity about what that character is at the heart. And of course then the family itself must reflect that, the family unit. And this in Islam, we would argue, and in fact in all prophetic messages and prophetic traditions, is very consistent. The virtues of honesty, kindness, generosity, love, mercy, compassion, all of these things, patience, we don't disagree on these. So therefore you'd have thought that, okay, that being the case, these would be the values and the ethics that we would want to have manifested with any governance we have, or with any polity that runs our society, and it should be the measure by which we judge our leaders and those who fashion our society. It should be the set of measures that we have installed within anybody who is a role model or a society leader, across our cultural or social or political platforms. There has to be a criteria based on civilized, balanced, human behavior. And I think that the Holy Scriptures and the messages from the divine that have come time and time again have all reiterated this human character you talk about. And linking it to Ayatollah Khomeini, I think he lived that persona, he lived that character throughout his life. People would not have followed him in the way they did unless what he said matched what he did, and what he was reflected into what he was asking others to be. So this is the sincerity of the man, the honesty of the man. Whichever way you cut him or slice him, you'll see that he actually had consistency. He had no inconsistencies in that regard. And for me, I guess the inspiration really is that therefore he's building on a template. The model and the template he was building on, I have to say, was ultimately those prophetic messengers, but very specifically also the family of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who we have the most detailed traditions about how his son-in-law, Imam Ali alayhi salam, his cousin, his daughter, his grandchildren, and his immediate family, how they lived. And Faiza, we have a very rich history of how time and time again, century after century, the progeny of the Holy Prophet, which was foretold by the Prophet, would be the main revivers of this tradition, of this heritage. And today we have Ayatollah Khomeini, but we have Ayatollah Khamenei, both Sayyids, both progenies of the Prophet Muhammad, both trying to live an optimal existence based on those prophetic lifestyles, doing so within their families, and now emanating them out into the civilization of Iran and beyond. And I think this is something which, there's Alexander Dugin, for instance, in Russia, for instance, who writes, a philosopher who writes very deeply, has recognized these commonalities and this necessity for establishing this. And I think Dr. Marcus also has hinted at it, that we're craving and desperate for having those kinds of individuals. And in Imam Khomeini, I think what we're blessed with is a very, very pure example. If you research the way even he handled the Anglo-Zionists, My theory, and this is only a theory, was that after the 1974 conference with Bhutto had, in which involved the Shah of Iran and many of the Arab despotic leaders, there was a move, it seemed, for greater independence, but a secular style independence pushed by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto at that time, which the Shah actually also vibed with. Within 4 or 5 years of that conference in Lahore, the West, or the Anglo-Zionists, wiped out every one of those leaders, or coerced them, whether it was through assassination of King Saud, or the killing of Anwar Sadat, or the hanging of Bhutto, or Libya's Gaddafi being bombed. You saw all the people who collaborated within that venture were decimated. Now, in amongst that, I believe that these Western powers made a serious mistake in Iran. They wanted a little bit of a change in this region to get it back under control for their own purposes. So these secular, leaders didn't get away with escaping their grasp. But with Ayatollah Khomeini, I think they made a serious mistake. Even when he was in France, they thought he was a fluffy little religious man who would disappear in the background. And I think they wanted Bani Sadr and his ilk, the liberal Zionist-orientated liberal Iranians, to take over. I think that backfired on them because they didn't understand that this movement, which had a clarity about wanting a real principled man as their leader, was what took over. And it was the youngsters, as Badul rightly said, it was the younger fraternity, it was the rural masses, it was those people who were rooted in traditional lifestyles. They're the ones who supported Ayatollah Khomeini. They're the ones who continued to fight for Iran. And today, they are still the ones who are at the forefront of this revolution. And so I think that character is everything. I think that, not having those leadership characteristics in the political circuit, I mean, will anybody die for Rishi Sunak? Will anybody die for Keir Starmer here? Is anybody going to turn out for a funeral en masse for Joe Biden when he dies? How far will they have to bury Donald Trump before everybody starts doing a sacred tawaf around his shrine that I'm sure the Americans will want to build at some point? No, it's not happening. This happens for special people who have a real sincerity. They can get things wrong. It's not that they're perfect, they're not masoom. They tried their best and they meant what they said and they lived by what they said. And I think that's all we can take away from Imam Khomeini's revolution, that now we've got other leaders like Sayyid Nasrullah, who also acts and behaves in the same way. Sheikh Zakzaki acts in the same way. The Houthi leadership under the Sayyid there, same thing. So, you need to see consistency with your leaders, and they need to reflect a clear-cut set of values. And I kind of agree with Marcus. What he said was very relevant, that you don't trample over people's cultural and their identities. You deal with the ethics and the virtues. That can change. Those principles need to change, because if your society is morally corrupt and is ethically bankrupt or morally completely disorientated, you need to bring back those old traditional values. And I think that's what the struggle of the resistance, inspired by the Ayatollah Khomeini's movement and others around the world, is now moving towards. And I think that we hopefully will see over a period of time the disintegration, the self-destruction of this neoliberal, neoconservative sort of totalitarianism, or even fascism, whatever you want to describe it as. It's this oligarchical monstrosity which wants to plunder and suck the lifeblood of all people around the world. That we can just pray that will happen. But on the ground, there are practical boots which are trying to make it happen as well.
Thank you so much, Mohsin Bhai. Time is really up now, so I just have 2 minutes left. If Mr. Marcus, you want to add any point or anything in your mind, I would like to ask you if you want to share anything else.
Yes, in relation to Khomeini's political beliefs and in relation to his religious beliefs and his political convictions, he was the truest of the true. He was the purest of the pure. He stood by everything he believed in. He stood by everything that he said. He never compromised 1 inch. He never capitulated. Again, compare and contrast Khomeini to the sinister, dark forces and their useful idiots who are ruling the Western world. Mohsin referred to Sunak. Well, Sunak was made Prime Minister to enforce even further multiculturalism on the British people. Same as why the idiot in London is there, the idiot in Wales is there, and the idiot who was previously in control of Scotland. These people have no principles. They have no morals whatsoever. And one final note. Under Khomeini, anyone who attempted to normalize paedophilia or normalize Satanism really would not have had any future of any kind whatsoever. And yet, in the Western world, the Western ruling elite are doing just that. They are normalizing Satanism. They are normalizing paedophilia. Indeed, last year, the BBC ran an article saying, if you think you know about Satanism, think again. Now, very soon, I predict in Britain and in America and in Canada, Satanism will soon be taught in schools as a religion. That is why I say the Western world needs its equivalent of Khomeini, someone who is devoted to Western civilization, devoted to the Western cultural and spiritual values, and devoted to the West's religion, which is, of course, Christianity. And unless that happens, and unless that happens very, very soon, then quite frankly, the Western world will disappear. Western indigenous populations will disappear, and then evil, and I say evil in a biblical sense, will have triumphed, and then the world will be in very, very serious trouble.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marcus. Thank you so much, Sister Batul. I'm really honored to have you all on the show, and Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, really grateful for your time. And in the end, just would say, like, once Eduardo Ignelli went to visit Imam Khomeini, and he just had a half an hour meeting with him, and he said in his some kind of discussion somewhere, like, Imam Khomeini has given him Quran, Najul Balagha, peak of eloquence, and the Sahifa Sajadiya, and this triangle kept him in some kind of on another journey. So if we want to learn something really really spiritual and really want to impact on our own self and the other around us, we should also follow this legacy from Imam Khomeini Rahmatullah Alayh. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I will take a leave on this note. Look after yourself and everyone around you. Inshallah, we'll see you next week. Allah Hafiz.